So we left off with a handle that was carved but needed to be fitted to the eye. So I've got all sides square, and I'll start by taking off the corners with a block plane and introducing a taper so that when I start to tap the handle into the eye, it will identify which spots are rubbing and will need to be taken off in order for the head to seat down further down the haft. I find by being methodical and taking off each corner and then the corners of that and then the corners of that, you end up with a much more even shape than if you just try and freehand it from the start. Another thing I'm doing is trying to blend the lines of the handle into the area where the haft is going to fit into the head so that I can get a nice clean look when it's finally mounted and there won't be any jarring transitions or something that might get in the way of your hands while you're carving. What I'm doing here is pressing the head onto the haft just with firm hand pressure, and that's actually going to throw up a little burr in the wood or a little chip in the wood that I can then take off with my block plane and smooth it out. I'm going to oil and wax the handle at this point to protect it while I do the rest of the shaping. I'm using the same general purpose oil and wax that I use for my spoons as well, which is 3 parts hemp oil to 1 part beeswax. I keep it in a little tin in my basket. After a while of using the block plane, I will switch to my Lloyd knife for taking off individual areas that need attention so I can start to get the head seated down on the haft. You want there to be a few centimeters of stick out at the end. I made the handle for this knife out of the same wood that this axe handle is going to be made from, so if you want to see the video on how I did that, I'll put it up in the cards. You can see that I'm trying to just remove wood from the areas where the head is getting caught, and also a bit beyond that, so that every time I reseat the head, it's going to go a little bit further down. So I've skipped ahead and I've got the head fully down on the haft, and I'm going to use my Ryoba saw to cut the kerf for the wedge. For the wedge, I've got this piece of maple. It's dry, and it's important that the wedge is dry if the handle is a little bit wet, because you do not want the wedge to be shrinking. If the handle shrinks a little bit and the wedge is dry, it's just going to make the wedge a tighter fit, as long as it's not enough to make the handle loose in the head. So I'll do the rough shaping with my carving axe, and then I'll take it over to the planing stop on my bench and use a chisel to get it to just the right size and angle for this particular axe head. It's important to chamfer the top corners of the wedge where you're going to be striking it with the hammer, because you don't want it splintering so that it might not seat as far down as you would like. I'll just check visually that the axe head is seated down where I want it and that everything is lined up straight, because after I pound the wedge in I won't be able to correct that anymore. And I'm just making a few adjustments to the wedge so that it's going to go in nicely. The axe head has quite a strong taper from the bottom to the top, so you'll notice that my wedge is quite thick, so I'm able to start the wedge just with hand pressure. And usually I wouldn't use a hatchet as a hammer, but in this particular instance I'm looking for a hammer that has a rectangular section so that it will contact the whole of the wedge and won't break one part out before the rest gets pounded in. The last step is to trim off the excess, and then I'll use a knife to chamfer all those corners. Now, when the customer dropped this axe off to me, I had actually already reground and hollow ground the edge on my tormek before I decided that we would put the new handle on it. So what I'm going to do now is hone over that hollow ground edge and make a flat over hollow ground profile. The advantage of a flat over hollow grind is that it has all the exact same characteristics of a full flat grind or a Scandi grind, except it's much easier and quicker to sharpen because there's no material in the middle of the bevel. Your stone or whatever you use to sharpen is going to ride exactly on those two rails and make it easy to replicate the exact edge angle every single time. What I'm doing here is grinding away a bit of the edge and then flipping it over and checking to see if I've developed a burr on the other side, which is going to let me know whether I have reached all the way to the apex of the edge with my sharpening. Once I've done that on both sides, I'll switch to the sharp side of the stone and do the same thing. Because of the hollow grind, it's quite easy for me to keep this small pocket-sized stone dead flat on the bevel, so I can do a technique like this, which is going to get a very even action. I'm alternating between straight and circular motions with the stone so that I can sort of monitor the scratch pattern on the bevel and see that the coarser scratches from the coarse side of the stone have been completely taken out by the fine side of the stone. Once I've got the burr off both sides, it's time to strop the edge on my leather strop. So this is just a big piece of vegetable tanned leather which I've mounted to a hardwood board, maple in this case, and it is impregnated with tormek paste polishing compound. I'll generally do around 20 to 40 passes on each side for an edge like this, and then that's going to get it working sharp. When I move the axe under the light, you can see the polished rails that I've created through this process. So all that's left to do is to test the axe on a sort of real world case, which for me is going to be hewing the side of this big piece of green birch. And what I'm looking for here is not only a comfortable handle, but that the axe is going to bite in cleanly and also take off straight chips that leaves behind a good surface finish as well. Another thing to look for is to see whether you are making full width chips like I am here, where the entire surface of the axe is taking a cut. So I'm satisfied with how the hatchet is performing now. It's time to give it back to the customer. Thanks for following along with this hatchet rehang, and if you enjoyed it, please feel free to leave a like on this video or subscribe to my channel for more greenwood spoon carving content.